There is a stirring in the deep places of the soul, a movement so subtle at first that you might mistake it for the ordinary restlessness of an unsettled mind. But this is no common disturbance. This is the voice of your truest self, speaking from chambers within you that have remained sealed for seasons, perhaps for lifetimes. It begins as barely more than a whisper, a fleeting sense that something essential is shifting beneath the carefully maintained surface of your daily existence. Like the ancient hero myths tell us, you stand now at a threshold you did not consciously choose to approach. One moment you are walking the familiar path of who you have always been, and the next, you find yourself at the edge of territory that exists beyond the maps your ego has drawn. The ground beneath your feet feels different somehow, less solid, as if the very foundations of your identity are beginning to reveal themselves as more fluid than you ever imagined possible. This is the primo movens, the first mover of transformation that Jung understood as the unconscious mind's irrepressible drive toward wholeness. Your psyche, in its infinite wisdom, has begun to outgrow the container of your current self-understanding, the persona you have worn like a second skin. The collection of roles and identities that once fit you perfectly now feels constrictive, like clothing from a childhood you have mysteriously outgrown overnight. You feel it in the way familiar words sit strangely in your mouth when you speak about yourself, as if you are reciting lines from a play you no longer remember auditioning for. The scripts that once flowed effortlessly, the responses you gave when asked who you are, what you want, what brings you joy, now feel like artifacts from an archaeological dig of your former self. They belong to someone you recognize but can no longer fully inhabit. This disturbance is not random. It is not the chaos of breakdown but the intelligent disruption that precedes breakthrough. Your unconscious mind, that vast repository of wisdom and potential that lies beyond the reach of your rational awareness, has recognized that you are ready for the next movement in the symphony of your becoming. It knows, with a knowing that transcends thought, that the cocoon of your current identity has served its purpose and must now be dissolved to make way for what seeks to emerge. The tremors you feel are not signs of something going wrong but of something going deeply, profoundly right. They are the birth pangs of a new version of yourself that has been gestating in the darkness of the unconscious, waiting for the proper season to make itself known. A restlessness has taken residence in your bones. But this is not the ordinary agitation of an overstimulated mind or the simple boredom of routine. This is something altogether more sacred, more profound, a divine discontent that signals the soul's recognition that it has outgrown its current dwelling place. Like autumn leaves that begin to loosen their grip on familiar branches, sensing the approach of a season that demands their release. You feel the stirrings of a holy dissatisfaction with the life you have been living. What once brought you genuine satisfaction now feels curiously hollow, as if you are going through the motions of desires that belonged to an earlier version of yourself. The achievements that once filled you with pride now ring with the empty echo of a bell whose clapper has been removed all form. No substance, no resonance with the deeper chambers of your being. You find yourself wondering when these pursuits lost their power to nourish you, when the goals you worked so hard to achieve began to feel like beautiful shells washed up on a shore, empty of the living creature that once inhabited them. This is not the cynicism of middle age or the disillusionment of dreams deferred. This is something far more mysterious and ultimately more hopeful. It is the psyche's innate wisdom recognizing that you have evolved beyond your current container. Your soul, in its relentless drive toward wholeness, has grown too large for the identity you have been inhabiting. Like a hermit crab that has outgrown its shell, you sense the need to find new shelter. Even though the prospect of venturing forth unprotected feels terrifying, the ego, that part of you that has worked so diligently to construct and maintain your sense of who you are, resists this movement with every fiber of its being. It clings to the familiar shores of your established identity like a shipwrecked survivor clutching driftwood, terrified of releasing its grip even though the very thing it holds may be keeping you from swimming to safety. The ego knows only what has been. It cannot see what might be. It experiences your sacred discontent as threat rather than invitation, as ending rather than beginning. But beneath the ego's fearful protestations, another voice speaks, quieter but infinitely more authoritative. This is the voice of the self, that archetypal center of wholeness that Jung understood as the organizing principle of the psyche. The self whispers of deeper waters waiting to be explored, of territories within you that remain unmapped and therefore brimming with possibility. It knows that your current dissatisfaction is not a problem to be solved but a sacred invitation to be honored. In this divine discontent lies the seed of your becoming, the initial crack in the shell that will eventually allow your larger self to emerge. The restlessness you feel is not random neural firing but the intelligent stirring of transformation itself, preparing you for the journey from who you have been to who you are capable of becoming. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the very ground beneath your feet begins to shift, when the pillars that have held up your world reveal themselves to be made not of stone, but of salt, beautiful, crystalline, yet destined to dissolve under the gentle persistence of life's rain. This is the hour when your carefully constructed certainties begin their sacred crumbling. The persona, that mask you have worn so long it feels like skin, starts to show its hairline fractures. The professional identity that once felt unshakable, the relationships that seemed eternal, the beliefs that anchored your sense of meaning will begin to feel strangely foreign, like clothes that no longer fit a body that has grown in ways you cannot yet comprehend. What once felt solid now feels gossamer thin, translucent, ready to tear at the slightest touch of authentic questioning. This is not catastrophe, though the ego experiences it as such. This is the nigredo, the alchemical blackening that precedes all true transformation. The ancient wisdom traditions knew this phase well, the dark night of the soul, the desert wandering, the descent into the underworld. It is the necessary dissolution that makes space for what seeks to be born. Your mind, trained in the logic of linear progression, rebels against this apparent regression. I should be moving forward, it protests, not backward into uncertainty. But the soul operates by different laws, understanding that sometimes we must unlearn before we can learn anew, must empty before we can be filled, must die to who we were before we can be reborn into who we are becoming. The beliefs that once seemed as permanent as mountains begin to reveal their perhaps the career path you pursued with such determination no longer calls to you. Perhaps the relationship patterns you've repeated for decades suddenly feel like old scripts from a play you no longer wish to perform. Perhaps the spiritual or philosophical frameworks that once provided comfort now feel too small to contain the expanding mystery of your experience. This dissolution is not punishment, it is preparation. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, begins to compost the old forms of your life, breaking them down into the rich soil from which new growth can emerge. What feels like loss to the conscious mind is actually the soul's way of making space, of clearing the inner landscape for a more authentic expression of your being. The shadow, long denied and projected outward, begins to emerge during this phase. The parts of yourself you've hidden, the aspects you've deemed unacceptable, the wild and untamed elements of your nature, they all rise to the surface as the old structures weaken their grip. This can feel disturbing, even terrifying, but it is actually a sign of health. The psyche is calling back all the exiled parts of yourself, preparing for the great work of integration that lies ahead. Your dreams during this time become particularly vivid, filled with images of destruction and decay, houses crumbling, bridges collapsing, familiar landscapes transforming into alien terrain. These are not nightmares but necessary visions, the unconscious mind's way of processing the dissolution of old forms and preparing for the emergence of new ones. Pay attention to these nocturnal messages. They are the soul's way of guiding you through the labyrinth of transformation. The collapse of old certainties is ultimately an act of mercy, though it rarely feels that way in the moment. The false self, the persona you've outgrown, is being gently but firmly dismantled to make room for a more authentic expression of your being. Like a snake shedding its skin or a butterfly dissolving in its chrysalis, you are being prepared for a metamorphosis that requires the courage to let go of who you have been in order to become who you truly are. In the sacred theater of sleep, where the rational mind surrenders its tyrannical hold and the soul speaks in its native tongue of symbol and metaphor, your unconscious becomes both prophet and guide. Here, in the liminal space between day and night, between conscious and unconscious, your psyche weaves visions that carry the scent of tomorrow, dreams that speak not of who you have been, but of who you are. Becoming. The dream self, liberated from the constraints of linear time and logical causation, walks boldly through landscapes yet to be born. In these nocturnal journeys, you meet figures that embody your unlived potential, the artist you've never dared to become, the lover you've been afraid to be, the wise elder already growing within your current self. These dream beings are not mere fantasy, but glimpses of the archetypal energies stirring in the depths of your transforming psyche. Your sleeping mind becomes a bridge between worlds, carrying messages from the future self that is already emerging in the invisible realms of possibility. The symbols that dance through your dreams, flying over vast oceans, finding hidden rooms in familiar houses, speaking languages you've never learned, these are not random neural firings but meaningful communications from the part of you that knows where this transformation is leading. Carl Jung understood dreams as sati, balancing the one-sided attitudes of consciousness with the deeper wisdom of the unconscious. But during times of profound transformation, dreams take on an additional quality. They become perspective, offering previews of the psychological territories you are preparing to inhabit. The recurring dream of the garden you've never planted, the recurring vision of the mountain you've never climbed, the recurring encounter with the stranger who feels mysteriously familiar. These are the soul's way of preparing you for the metamorphosis that approaches. Pay attention to the emotional texture of these transformational dreams. They often carry a quality of recognition rather than surprise, as if you are remembering rather than discovering. The dream landscape feels simultaneously foreign and familiar, like returning to a home you've never seen but somehow always known that existed. This is the paradox of individuation. Becoming who you truly are feels like both a radical departure and a homecoming. The ancient wisdom keepers knew that dreams were letters from the gods, messages from the realm beyond ordinary consciousness. In your current passage, they become letters from your future self, offering guidance and encouragement for the journey ahead. The unconscious, in its infinite wisdom, is already preparing the psychological ground for the new self that seeks to emerge. Do not dismiss the strange or seemingly impossible elements of these transformational dreams. The psyche speaks in symbols because some truths are too large for the literal mind to contain. The dragon you slay in the dream represents the old fears that must be conquered. The treasure you discover in the hidden chamber represents the authentic gifts waiting to be claimed. The key you find represents the solution to the riddle of your becoming. Trust these nocturnal messengers. They are breadcrumbs on the path of your transformation, guiding you toward the dawning recognition of who you are meant to be. Like a tuning fork struck in the silence of transformation, your changing essence begins to emit a new frequency, vibrational signature that calls to those who share your commitment to authentic becoming. This is one of the most mysterious and beautiful aspects of psychological metamorphosis, the way the soul, in its process of individuation, begins to magnetize other souls who are walking similar paths of awakening. You may notice it first as a gentle dissolution. Relationships that once felt central to your life begin to fade with surprising naturalness, not through conflict or dramatic endings, but through the quiet recognition that certain connections have completed their purpose in your story. Like autumn leaves releasing their hold on the branch, these relationships fall away not from rejection, but from organic completion. The friend who once mirrored your old self no longer resonates with who you are becoming. The social circles that once provided comfort now feel constraining, too small to contain the expanding circumference of your authentic self. This natural falling away makes space for something far more mysterious and meaningful. The magnetic, the attraction of kindred spirits who are also in the throes of transformation. These new connections form with a synchronicity that borders on the magical. A chance encounter in a bookstore, a conversation with a stranger on a train, a new colleague who seems to speak the same soul language. These meetings carry the unmistakable, a signature of destiny rather than coincidence. The teachers arrive disguised as ordinary people, carrying exactly the wisdom or challenge you need for your next stage of growth. The mirror souls appear, reflecting back aspects of your emerging self that you couldn't quite see on your own. The fellow travelers join you, companions who understand the terrain of transformation because they too have chosen the difficult but necessary path of psychological evolution. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that suggest an underlying order to existence that transcends our rational understanding. During periods of profound personal transformation, synchronicities multiply, as if the universe itself is conspiring to support your journey toward wholeness. The right book falls into your hands at the perfect moment. The right person appears, just when you need their particular form of guidance or companionship. These new souls recognize you not through the masks of persona or the familiar patterns of your old self, but through the authenticity that emerges as you shed the false layers. With conditioning, they see the real you that is struggling to be born, and their recognition helps midwife that birth. In their presence you feel permission to be more fully yourself, to explore aspects of your nature that remained hidden in your previous relationships. The quality of connection with these transformation-aligned souls is different from relationships rooted in comfort or convenience. These bonds are forged in the fire of mutual becoming, strengthened by shared commitment to growth rather than shared resistance to change. They create a kind of sacred conspiracy, a community of individuals dedicated to supporting each other's journey toward wholeness. Trust this mysterious magnetism. Your soul knows what it needs for its continued evolution, and it will draw to you exactly the right companions for this phase of your journey. The old relationships that no longer serve may fall away, but they make space for connections that will nourish the person you are becoming rather than reinforcing the person you used to be. A profound hunger begins to stir within you, not for food or companionship or entertainment, but for something far more essential, the sacred gift of solitude. This is not the hollow loneliness of disconnection, nor the bitter isolation of withdrawal, but a deep cellular craving for the sanctuary of inner space where the soul can finally speak without the cacophony of external demands drowning out its whispered wisdom. Like the archetypal hermit ascending the mountain path with his lantern held high, you find yourself drawn toward the quiet places, the empty rooms at dawn, the forest paths unmarked by human footsteps, the moments between obligations when silence settles like snow upon the landscape of your life. In these spaces, something essential can finally breathe. The part of you that has been holding its breath in the crowded theater of social performance can finally exhale. This hunger for solitude emerges precisely because transformation requires the chrysalis of inner contemplation. Just as the caterpillar must dissolve completely in the darkness before it can become the butterfly, you must create spaces where the old self can safely dissolve and the new self can safely emerge. This is not regression into antisocial isolation, but rather a sophisticated form of psychological hygiene, the recognition that becoming requires both the energy of relationship and the clarity of solitude. In the sanctuary of aloneness, you meet the deeper currents of your being. The voice that gets lost in the noise of daily interaction can finally be heard. The subtle promptings of intuition, usually overshadowed by the urgent demands of external life, begin to emerge with startling clarity. The dreams that need to be dreamed. The emotions that need to be felt, the insights that need to ripen all require the protected space of solitude to fully unfold. This is not the hermit's flight from the world, but the hermit's preparation for deeper engagement with it. By withdrawing temporarily from the demands of others, you create space to discover what you actually have to offer rather than what others expect you to provide. By stepping away from the roles you've been playing, you create room to discover who you are beneath the masks of persona and performance. The modern world, with its constant connectivity and perpetual stimulation, often treats solitude as a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be received. But the transforming soul knows better. It understands that just as seeds need the dark silence of earth to germinate, the emerging self needs the protective darkness of solitude to grow strong enough to withstand the light of exposure. Notice how this hunger for solitude coincides with your transformation. It is not coincidental but essential, the psyche's way of creating the conditions necessary for deep change. In the hermit's cave, lit only by the lantern of inner knowing, the real work of becoming takes place. Here, in the sanctuary of your own company, you meet the person you are becoming and learn to trust the authority of your own authentic voice. Trust this hunger, honor this calling. The hermit's path is not permanent exile but temporary retreat, the necessary pause that allows the soul to gather its strength for the next phase of its journey into wholeness. At the threshold of transformation, a figure emerges from the depths of your psyche. Figure asterisk. You have spent a lifetime avoiding, denying, and projecting onto others. This is your shadow, that repository of all you have deemed unacceptable, inappropriate, or incompatible with the image you've carefully constructed of yourself. But now, as the old structures dissolve and new ones prepare to form, the shadow steps forward with unprecedented clarity. No longer content to remain hidden in the basement of your consciousness, the shadow does not announce itself with fanfare or drama. Instead, it reveals itself through the subtle recognition that the qualities you most despise in others, the selfishness, the anger, the mesinsis, the raw neediness, are actually reflections of aspects within yourself that you have refused to acknowledge. The colleague whose ambition repulses you mirrors your own disowned hunger for recognition. The friend whose emotional volatility irritates you reflects your own suppressed intensity. The stranger whose apparent laziness triggers your judgment embodies your own secret longing for rest. This confrontation with your dark twin is not punishment but invitation, a sacred summons to wholeness that can only be answered through the courageous act of integration. The emerging self, the one that seeks to be born through this transformation, requires all of you, not just the polished, socially acceptable parts, but the messy, complicated, fully human aspects that make you real rather than perfect. Jung understood that the shadow contains not only our repressed negative qualities but also our unlived potential, the parts of ourselves we've sacrificed in order to fit into the narrow definitions of who we thought we should be. The rebel you never allowed yourself to be lives in the shadow alongside the selfishness you've always denied. The artist you abandoned to become responsible dwells there with the anger you've never permitted yourself to feel. The lover you've been afraid to be shares space with the power you've been reluctant to claim. The shadow dancing at the threshold of your transformation is not your enemy but your missing piece, the part of you that holds the keys to your own completion. Without this integration, your transformation remains incomplete, a surface change rather than a fundamental metamorphosis. With it, you become capable of authentic wholeness, of being genuinely human rather than performing an idealized version of humanity. This phase of shadow work often feels destabilizing because it requires you to abandon the comfortable fiction that you are only light, only good, only acceptable. It asks you to embrace the paradox of being both saint and sinner, both wise and foolish, both generous and selfish, sometimes within the same moment. This is not moral relativism but psychological realism, the recognition that wholeness includes all aspects of the human experience. The shadow work of transformation is ultimately an act of self-compassion, the willingness to love yourself completely rather than conditionally. As you extend this acceptance to your own disowned parts, you naturally extend it to others as well. The projections that once distorted your relationships begin to dissolve, replaced by the clearer vision that comes from owning your own complete humanity. Dance with this shadow at the threshold. Welcome it, not as a destroyer but as the missing half of your wholeness. The dark twin whose embrace makes you finally, fully real. The rigid architecture of linear time begins to soften around the edges, becoming fluid, porous, no longer the tyrant that once governed every moment of your existence. Minutes stretch into eternities during moments of profound recognition. Hours collapse into heartbeats when you are fully present to the mystery of now. You are learning to inhabit the eternal present, that timeless dimension where the soul naturally dwells and where transformation actually occurs. Synchronicities begin to multiply like stars emerging at dusk, each meaningful coincidence revealing another thread in the underlying web that connects all things. The book that falls open to exactly the page you need to read, the phone call that comes precisely when you need to hear that voice. The stranger who appears with the exact words your soul has been waiting to receive. These are no longer dismissed. as mere coincidence, but recognized as evidence of a deeper order, a sacred geometry that governs the dance of becoming. The universe begins speaking to you in a language older than words, through symbols and signs, through the flight patterns of birds and the arrangement of clouds, through the numbers that appear repeatedly and the songs that play at precisely the right moment. Your perception is shifting from the mechanical worldview of cause and effect to the organic understanding of meaning and connection. You are awakening to what the ancient traditions knew, that reality is far more mysterious and interconnected than the rational mind can comprehend. Sacred geometry reveals itself in the most ordinary moments. The spiral arrangement of leaves around a stem mirrors the spiral of your own growth. The patterns of frost on a window reflect the crystalline structure of insight forming in your consciousness. The way light falls across your morning coffee cup becomes a moment of revelation, a small teaching about the interplay of shadow and illumination that governs your inner landscape. Space itself becomes charged with meaning. Certain places call to you with inexplicable magnetism, the corner of the park where you always pause, the chair by the window where clarity comes most easily, the stretch of road where insights consistently emerge. These are not random preferences but recognition of power spots, places where the veil between worlds grows thin and the deeper currents of existence become more accessible, that you find yourself naturally attuned to the rhythms that exist beneath the surface of ordinary time, the cycles of expansion and contraction, the seasons of your own becoming, the tides of inspiration and integration that govern the soul's journey. The frantic urgency that once drove your days begins to give way to a more organic pacing, a trust in the perfect timing of your own unfolding. This is the soul learning to perceive through different eyes, to inhabit the mythic dimension of existence, where every moment carries potential for revelation and every encounter holds the possibility of transformation. You are remembering how to live inside the sacred story of your own becoming, where time serves depth rather than speed, and space holds meaning rather than merely distance. From the depths of your being, a new voice begins to emerge, not the neurotic chatter of the ego with its endless anxieties and demands, nor the harsh criticism of the inner judge that has policed your choices for so long, but something altogether different, the calm, unshakable authority of the self. This voice speaks with the quiet confidence of deep knowing, pointing not toward what others expect or what society demands, but toward what is authentically true for you. This inner compass operates by different principles than the external authorities you have long consulted. It points toward authenticity rather than approval, toward growth rather than comfort, toward the difficult truth rather than the convenient lie. When this voice speaks, it carries the weight of your entire being behind it, body, mind, and soul aligned in recognition of what is genuinely right for your unique path of becoming. You find yourself making choices that surprise even you, decisions that seem to flow from sources deeper than conscious thought. The job offer that looks perfect on paper but feels wrong in your bones, you decline it without fully understanding why. The relationship that makes logical sense but lacks the spark of genuine connection, you end it, despite the practical complications. The creative project that seems impractical but ignites something essential within you. You pursue it despite the voices of doubt. This is not impulsiveness or rebellion but something far more sophisticated. The soul learning to trust its own knowing. The rational mind, accustomed to being the final arbiter of all decisions, struggles to comprehend this new authority. How can you be so certain about choices you cannot fully explain? How can you trust feelings over facts, intuition over analysis? Yet the results speak for themselves. Each choice made from this deeper knowing leads to greater alignment, greater aliveness, greater authenticity. The voice of inner authority does not shout or demand attention. It whispers, suggests, nudges gently toward truth. It speaks through the felt sense of rightness that settles in your body when you encounter something that serves your highest good. It communicates through the sudden clarity that emerges when you stop trying to figure everything out and simply listen to what your soul already knows. This developing trust in your own inner knowing marks a crucial shift in your relationship with authority itself. No longer do you automatically defer to external experts, conventional wisdom, or societal expectations. Instead, you learn to consult these sources while maintaining allegiance to the deeper authority that emerges from your own direct experience of truth. You become your own guru, your own guide, your own final court of appeal. The golden thread of intuition begins to guide your steps, leading you through territories unmarked by any external map. This thread connects you to the larger pattern of your life, to the meaningful direction that has been trying to emerge all along. Following it requires courage because it often leads away from the well-traveled paths that others recommend and toward the unmarked territory that only you can explore. Trust this voice. It is not leading you astray but leading you home to the authentic self that has been waiting patiently for permission to finally live. A fire begins to burn within you. Not the destructive flame that consumes, but the sacred fire that transforms, that takes the raw material of your experience and alchemizes it into something entirely new. Creativity becomes not mere hobby or self-indulgence, but urgent necessity. a compelling need to give form to the formless energies that surge through your transforming being. This is the soul's way of speaking, of making visible the invisible work of becoming that happens in the depths, whether through paint on canvas, words on page, movement through space, or the simple artistry of how you choose to live each day. You find yourself compelled to create not from the ego's desire for recognition or the mind's need for productivity, but from something far more primal and essential. This creative fire is the anima and animus-finding voice, those archetypal energies of the unconscious seeking manifestation in the tangible world. The feminine principle of receptive inspiration dances with the masculine principle of focused expression, birthing forms that carry the essence of your transformation. Your creativity becomes a bridge between worlds, the mysterious depths of the unconscious and the concrete reality of conscious expression. Through this bridge, the insights that come in dreams find their way into waking form. The emotions that have no name discover their voice. The visions that exist only in potential space begin to take shape in the physical realm. You become midwife to your own becoming, helping to birth the new self through the labor of creative expression. This is not the tortured creativity of the wounded artist, but the joyful creativity of the whole human being who has learned to channel the transformational energies rather than be overwhelmed by them. The creative act becomes a form of active meditation, a way of participating consciously in your own metamorphosis. Each brushstroke, each written word, each sung note, each conscious choice about how to arrange your living space, all become opportunities to give form to the emerging self. The creative works that emerge during this phase often surprise you, with their depth, their authenticity, their ability to capture truths you didn't know you knew. This is because they flow not from the limited perspective of the ego but from the deeper wellspring of the self, that archetypal center that contains your full potential. Through creative expression, you access parts of yourself that have been waiting for permission to emerge. Others recognize something different in your creative expressions during this time, a quality of aliveness, of authenticity, of having been touched by something greater than mere personal talent. This is the signature of work that emerges from transformation, art that carries the frequency of genuine becoming rather than mere self-expression. Trust this creative fire. Feed it not with the pressure of perfection but with the courage of authenticity. Allow it to burn away the false and illuminate the true. Through sacred expression, you participate in the great work of bringing your full self into being, of making visible the invisible transformation that is your birthright and your gift to the world. Asterisk.